With the forethought of planning, we can give a gift that no one else can, our own legacy. And now Elise Wall will lead us in our chalice lighting.
Good morning, everyone. Our topic this morning is one that can be difficult for some to approach. Talking about funerals and the end of our journey as humans can bring about feelings of fear or uncertainty, or perhaps an unnamed discomfort. As I light our chalice, I share these words excerpted from John O'Donohue's Blessing for the Traveler. A journey can become a sacred thing. Make sure before you go to take the time to bless your going forth, to free your heart of ballast, so that the compass of your soul might direct you toward the territories of spirit, where you will discover more of your hidden life and the urgencies that deserve to claim you. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. May it be so. Reverend Sherry.
Thank you, Elise. What a lovely blessing to start us with. So for those of you who are Elder Tree regulars, you know that I popped in accidentally last week, and it was so good to see all of you last week. It's so good to see you this week. And in between then and now, we had a death, and our dear Will Hayes had a funeral. So I'm really delighted to be able to talk with you about a funeral, but I also just want to, well, first I want to ask someone else who is on the team to make sure that we're letting folks in. Was I muted that whole time?
No.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Well, thank you for whomever is taking over the waiting room, letting in. But really just want to say thank you to this community for those of you who came to Will Hayes's funeral, and to say that one of the most sacred parts of my work as a minister is to officiate memorial services and funerals. But one of the things that is truly important about this community is that we accompany each other not only in life, but also in death. And one of the things I have seen about this congregation is that you all show up for each other to honor someone's life, to celebrate them, and to mourn their death. And that is no small thing. The funeral director mentioned that to me on Thursday, even with all of our tech problems, which I wish hadn't been the case, but I know Will was lovingly remembered both in the room and on Zoom by many people, that this community is one that shows up and loves well in death. And I'm really proud of us and honored by that truth. So when it comes to planning your own funeral, it's nice to just quickly get out of the way. Why do we say funeral? And why do we sometimes say memorial service or celebration of life? What are we talking about? So just a quick defining of our terms. Funeral, generally speaking, denotes the presence of a body. Unitarian Universalists tend to not do this. It's less common, though becoming increasingly common, especially as green burials become more of an option. And Jan will talk a little bit about that later. But it is an option available to you and to your loved ones. A memorial service can happen in the same time frame, relatively quickly after a death or a year later. But generally speaking, the deceased body is not there. So we're already starting with a dead body. That's a heck of a way to start your Saturday morning. But I feel like you were fairly warned in a program called Plan Your Own Funeral. So I'm just going to use funeral and memorial service interchangeably here, knowing that many of you may choose or have your families and loved ones choose to have a memorial service. A lot of the basic principles are going to apply to both. So as Unitarian Universalists, you might expect, we are fairly flexible in our form when it comes to memorial services. I always urge families to have one. Sometimes I will hear people say, I don't want there to be any fuss. I don't want you to spend money. I don't want you to go out of your way. A memorial service or a funeral is a gift to the people who loved you. It's a gift to the people who are left behind. And it's not a neat, tidy bow we get to tie up around grief, but it is an important step in being able to say goodbye to someone and to remember their life. But I'm guessing you all already know that because you came here. And so if you were somebody who thought, I want nothing to do with that, I'm going to live forever, and then when I die, I want no one to ever speak of it except possibly to throw a party, you wouldn't be here. So if we are planning a memorial service for you, it is helpful to have some idea of what you might have liked. So in the UU basic structure, the ways that I conduct memorial services, the ways that most UU ministers conduct memorial services, we start, not surprisingly, with the chalice lighting and opening words, and we close with closing words, often a prayer or meditation or a poem, and a chalice extinguishing. And then in the middle, there's a lot of room for flexibility. But we have a pretty standard format if there isn't something special requested. So we want to tell the story of your life. Where were you born? What did you do with the time between birth and death? The most important question that I ask family members when planning a memorial service is, what do you want people who didn't know your loved one to know about this person when they leave? I'm also realizing that I am looking at all of you, but I'm gonna spotlight myself. So apologies if you don't want me that big. You can go back to gallery view. But I get distracted by looking at all of you because I'm delighted by your presence. So the most important question I ask is, how do you want your loved one to be remembered? If someone didn't know them before coming here, what's the one thing that you want them to take away from this service about Sherry or about Elise or about Annie or about Jan or about Craig? What is it you want us to know? And so as you're asking that question of yourself, what is it that you want people to know? It's on you in the moment to live the way you would like to be remembered. That honestly, if you take one thing away from this, that is the piece that will be the most important. But we tell a life sketch, and then that really forms the structure, the skeleton for other people to hang memories on. We believe as Unitarian Universalists that there's no one particular sacred text from which all the world's wisdom comes from. And when we look at the 50 of us that are gathered here, my guess is the texts, the scriptures, the poems that speak most importantly to your life are going to be 150 different ones. The one thing we can all agree on is important is that the text of someone's life, the lived experience, is important and sacred to us. And so we like to invite as much as possible a few different people in your life. And you don't have to choose this because that may change, but if you have some ideas of people that you think could speak the truth in love about you, then it's worth asking them now. It's a surprisingly, if not fun, meaningful conversation to ask in advance. People who can speak to different aspects of your life. We're all one solid core of a person, but who we are at church is a different facet of who we are in our families, is a different facet of who we were at work. And it's nice to be able to have snapshots of one's life. When it comes to the other elements, readings and music are the basic building blocks. I have some readings that I will send to families, and I'll send those to all of you when we do our follow-up email. But it behooves you now, as you're going through in your Soul Matters group or in worship, if something really strikes you, take it down and keep it in a file, keep it in a document. Same with music. Some hymns that are easy to sing are helpful to have written down, but not necessary. None of these things are necessary. It is all to do with what's most important to you. So as I look at this room, some of you are people who are highly musical. That may be the most important thing to you. You might not care when it's scheduled. You just want to know that there can be a brass band there. That wouldn't be my choice, but it could be your choice, right? It's worth noting as you start to think about what are the things I would like, to also figure out what's most important and know that 10 or 11 things probably can't all be of equal importance. So it might be most important to you that your family can get there, which might mean that it needs to be scheduled 3 months after you've died, or scheduled around a particular person's ability to travel. It might be most important to you that this one particular song be played. It might be most important to you that this takes place at this particular location. So as you're tracking readings and scripture and speakers, it's helpful to note which is most important, to pick one, to give a sense to the people who will follow behind you. I would advise you, as you're thinking through these options, to think of it as something that's ever changing. Like so much of Unitarian Universalism, right? We believe in constantly revising, that we are continually growing and learning. And so the plan that you make now might be different than the plan that you make in 20 years or in 2 months. And that's okay. You don't have to get it perfect. Perfection is never the goal. And if you strive for hyper perfection in your plans, it will communicate to the people behind you that that's what you expect of them. And I don't think that's your intention, right? But it is helpful to give people some idea of what you would have liked. Here's where we get into the really uncomfortable piece. We move beyond the dead bodies and the scripture or the poetry and the readings and the music and the people. Part of funeral planning, we make do if we don't know. We will honor your life well and mourn your death and celebrate you. But it is helpful to know something of your spiritual life, to have had conversations with the people around you about what you think happens after you die. What matters? Because again, we've got 50 people in this room and we probably have 150 different opinions on that, because Unitarian Universalists are just like that. So to share with the people around you, this is what matters to me in death. This is what I would like to be said. This is what I find comforting. This is what I believe to be true. You don't have to have definitive answers to that, but to be able to set some parameters for the people around you for a memorial or a funeral is surprisingly important. I can't tell you how many memorial plans I've looked to where people have specified exactly the cups that they would like to be used at the funeral. And I don't mean to dismiss that preference. I think if that is what is most important to you, then by all means, let us know. But to also say, what do I think is happening here in a funeral service, in a memorial service? These are questions that are also good to be answering. So I just threw a lot at you. We'll also throw a little worksheet at you to work on with your loved ones or in your Soul Matters group or with a friend that you see here, because nobody showed up to this not interested in this topic. So I'm going to give you all free license to ask a friend here to sit with you as you work on your worksheets together. And know that those are things that you're welcome to share with the church so that we have them on file, and also that those are welcome to be revised constantly. Maybe don't file a new thing with the church every week, but feel free to, constantly be working on it and adding things. All right, that is the very basics of plan your own funeral. I just tossed a lot at you. We're going to toss a lot more today. I expect that you will not have, as I said, everything wrapped up in a tidy little bow by the time we leave today. But I do think that today will give you, like that skeleton we try to craft at memorial services, a sense of what's the journey here and where are the places I'm going to want to hang snapshots that are important, where are the places to come back and fill in some details. So I'd like to invite Kristen Holderly to bring us to our next segment.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Thanks, Reverend Sherry. I am here to talk to you as a member of the pastoral care team, along with Elise, who's going to follow me. I am going to just talk a little bit about what the pastoral care team does in general and related to funerals or memorial services. So for those of you, some of you may know this and some of you may not, but there are 5 members of our pastoral care team, and we are led by Reverend Margley. And we generally will call people and visit with them when we're not in a pandemic. If people request that they need some extra support or assistance or are going through something difficult, our weekly newsletter for church has information on how to get in touch with the pastoral care team, but I put the email here for anyone who might want it. And recently, Elise and one of our other members have started up a monthly caregiver support group, and we'll be looking to continue to expand offerings that the pastoral care team can provide to the congregation. Funeral related, just some things that we can offer is to help coordinate sending meals if family is interested, sending condolence cards and flowers, working with the family regarding when to announce the death to the congregation, and mentioning that person at service, and then, any other way that we could support your family, similar to what we would do to the congregation in general. So that's just a quick overview of what the pastoral care team does. And I'm going to send it over to Elise, who's going to talk about some personal and other experiences that she's had with regard to planning funerals, just to offer that perspective. So Elise can take it away.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. I have a personal experience I'd like to share. My own mother, at the age of 95, died in September of 2019. And when she was probably in her early 80s, she wrote a letter to both my brothers and me, outlining the way she'd like her memorial service to go. And so she identified scripture reading and hymns and other music that she particularly wanted to have as a part of her service. Unfortunately, because of timing, we actually haven't been able to do that for her yet because of COVID and whatnot. However, it was a great comfort to us, to have that in her own voice, to be able to read that letter. And we kind of knew anyway, but it was so lovely and so comforting for us to have that in her own voice, in her own words, those preferences that she has, exactly like what Reverend Sherry was mentioning. And then in my professional life, I spent roughly 10 years working in hospice and home health, and really observed several families where that wasn't the case, where the loved one who was failing had not made their preferences known. And the family, once the death occurred, that was another stress for them, another strain in that time, which is already so filled with different decisions to make. And especially if the individual didn't have a specific faith tradition or faith community they were connected to, not having any kind of input from the individual just made that process a little more difficult for families. And we did observe that several times throughout my time in hospice. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Jan Miller for some more information.
Hi, Thank you, Elise. I just wanted to say, sort of in the backdrop of this, we have a young person that's with us, spending the weekend with us. And in the backdrop is Prince Philip's funeral that's happening right now. And one of the commentators have mentioned over and over again that Prince Philip planned every detail of his memorial service, even down to the Range Rover special design that will carry his casket into Windsor Castle. So it's really, it just seems like perfect timing that we have royalty with us this morning as we're talking about our this component. I'd like to share my screen right now. If I, let's see.
Okay. Oops. So where's issues?
Yep. And can you go back to the first slide?
Okay.
Sorry, I am not as agile at this as I should be. I wanted to go back to the first screen. Well, I will just talk about this so I don't hold folks up. The first slide that I had was to talk about back to the beginning, another one. Back one more. There we go. The first slide, the second slide there. There we go.
Okay.
Sorry, we are just not as techy as we should be. I hope you will, I apologize for that. But upon your, one of the decisions that is so important, and I spent 20 years with the National Kidney Foundation talking to folks about how important it is. So please indulge me. But if you're thinking about organ donation, it's so important that you share your decision with your family prior to your death. If you don't make that decision prior to your death, your family may have to make that decision. And would they make that decision? Would they make the decision that would be the one that you would have made? And it really is a real burden to the family when, you know, mom wants to donate her son's organs and dad doesn't want to. And so the default is always really to go to no rather than yes. There are 114,000 people in the United States that are currently on the transplant waiting list, waiting for a life-saving organ transplant. And another name is added to that list every 15 minutes. And sadly, 20 people die every single day waiting for a life-saving transplant. So if you haven't talked about organ donation with your family or thought about it, I encourage you to have that discussion. You know, we used to encourage people to do that when there were family gatherings, you know, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, just say, have you thought about organ donation? And if you register at this website, and we'll send this out to you to donatelife.ny.gov. If you register, all the hospitals have access to this database, so they would know your decision. Okay. The next bit of planning that you would need to do prior to your death is if you wanted to donate your body as an anatomical gift to a medical school for continuing education for medical school students, you must do that prior to your death. I've had experiences where people said, you know, my good friend Dan passed away. I know how much he was grateful to the medical community for everything they did to keep him alive as long as possible. His wife wanted to donate his body. They will absolutely not. You have to do this prior to your death. And it's so simple. You go to the University of Rochester Medical Center website, you fill out 2 simple forms, and mail that back in. You'll receive a yellow card that you can keep with your will. But again, share that decision with your family. You still will need a funeral home if you die at home to transport your body to the med center. But if you die in a nursing home or in a hospital, the U of R, the med center will come and transport your body. But again, I can't, stress enough. This is a decision that you need to make, that you alone need to make this decision prior to your death. When my mom passed away 2 years ago, she had made this decision 15 years before her death, when she had had a health scare, and shared this with me and my sisters, and we knew exactly where that yellow card was. We knew exactly what we had to do, and we were so grateful to be able to honor her wishes and to have her body be donated, so that future generations of physicians will have had that experience. So I think it's a wonderful thing to consider. Burial options are so many. Cremation is one more and more popular option is cremation, an in-ground burial, an above-ground burial in a community mausoleum, an above-ground burial in a lawn crypt, an above-ground burial in a private mausoleum. I would encourage all of you to call, I here locally, I called Whitehaven. I spoke to Maureen at Whitehaven, and she was just a wealth of information to talk about prices and options and what they can do. So I just had a 45-minute conversation with her. I would encourage all of you to do the same, to see what your options could be.
Okay.
And we say location, location, location. We have a number of cemeteries. I just highlighted some of them that are here, but there are a number of smaller cemeteries that are usually associated with a church. But here it's the big ones that are in Rochester. I'd also like to ask Reverend Sherry at this time, could you talk about if people wanted to leave their ashes at First Unitarian, how that would happen?
Absolutely. So again, like all of these, it is helpful if you communicate that in advance, right? But regardless of whether or not it doesn't require as much prep as, let's say, donating your body. So all to say that if folks would like to be memorialized in our memorial garden, we scatter ashes in our memorial garden. And if folks have a memorial tree or bench, a small amount of ashes might be scattered there as well. But otherwise, a small service often will accompany the scattering of ashes. And I know some of you on this call have been to them, have helped lead them, have helped honor people that we've loved here. If you are memorialized in the garden, then what typically accompanies that also is that in the Susan B. Anthony Lounge, there's a plaque toward the windows with nameplates on it. And below that is a memorial book where family or whoever is making the arrangements, typically family, are invited to create a memorial page. So it might be exactly what's in your obituary. Sometimes folks will rewrite that, but a snapshot again of your life there is typically what would happen if you're scattered in the garden.
Great. Thank you, Reverend Sherry. My last slide, I just wanted to talk about a newer, greener option, which is green burial. And we define green burial as a way of caring for the dead with a minimal environmental impact. It helps in the conservation of natural resources, the reduction of carbon emissions, protections of the worker health, and the restoration and preservation of habitat. You can have your remains scattered in a green cemetery, or your body may be interred in a green cemetery. You'd have your choice of a very plain wooden casket, a wicker basket, or you could have your body just in a shroud that would be lowered into the ground. The cost is more, definitely, for a green burial, about $2,500 for a green burial versus about $1,300 to $1,500 for a traditional burial. And you still do need to contact a funeral home. And so I would suggest contacting 2 or 3 funeral homes to get ideas and talk to them ahead of time to get an idea about cost. We will also be sending out a list. There are 69 licensed funeral homes in Monroe County. And we will, in part of our packet, we will be emailing you the list of that. But again, and there are 4 cemeteries in Monroe County that allow for a green burial of a body. And I think it's just a wonderful, it used to be that, the wacky hippies out on the West Coast, Reverend Sherry's hometown, that's where the green burial. So as everything always, the trends move from West Coast to East Coast, I'm so delighted that this is becoming a very popular option in New York State. And at this point, I would like to turn everything over to Annie.
Hi, everyone. We really appreciate you joining all of us today. I'm going to talk about prepaid funerals and the pros and cons of doing that. And let me share my screen here. There we go. And also talking about some of the things for the survivors to think about after the funeral and how to put all this information together once you've made all these decisions. Before I go on with that, I just want to emphasize some things that Elise said. In my professional life as a financial planner, I've helped several families go through the death of a loved one, and truly pre-planning at whatever level is appropriate for you is a gift that you give your heirs. It really makes things a lot easier for your family members after the fact. And I think COVID has really emphasized that. A lot of people who thought that they had plenty of time to do that planning and would have plenty of opportunity to communicate with family members, found themselves unable to do so during those final days. So I think that's part of why this whole message is very timely this year. Okay. So a prepaid funeral. So this is essentially where you choose your funeral home ahead of time. And you choose your type of burial, you choose your casket if you wish to have one, or an urn. You choose any additional services that you'd like them to provide. That can be flowers, transportation services, all those things that you might need. And so what's nice about doing that ahead of time and paying for it ahead of time is that you can be assured that it reflects your wishes, everything that you would want. It also means that you get to choose how much you wish to spend on that, how much or how little. Some people feel like, oh, I don't want my family to spend a whole lot of money. Or some people feel like, oh, Prince Philip and his Land Rover, he was fine spending a lot of money to get exactly what he wanted, okay? And one of the pros of doing it that way is that you lock in the costs for those services, okay? But that's true only if those costs are guaranteed. And when you make this type of arrangement with a funeral home, it can be guaranteed or not guaranteed. So guaranteed would mean that no matter how much the prices go up in the future, you've paid for those services and the funeral home will provide them. Not guaranteed means that you've paid a certain amount of money towards the funeral, but the costs could change, and that money that you've set aside may or may not cover those costs in the future, okay? One thing about in the state of New York, you can rest assured that those funds are secure. In New York, the funeral home must take those funds and hold them in an interest-bearing trust account in your name. So that means, for example, if you decide down the road that you want to use a different funeral home, you can move that money to a different funeral home if you choose to do so, okay? Be aware that also means that your heirs could do so after you die. So you've made these choices, but it's still up to your heirs to respect those choices or not, okay? And a lot of people worry about, well, what if I prepay for a funeral and then the funeral home goes out of business or gets sold? Well, once again, because they're required to hold this money in trust for you, they would have to notify you if that were to happen, and then those funds can be refunded to you or moved if the home goes out of business. One of the biggest pros to prepaying for your funeral services is Medicaid planning. So Medicaid, of course, is the government benefit that takes over and pays for your care if you don't have any more money available, okay, which is different from Medicare, which, as many of you know, is your health insurance for, when you're over age 65. Medicaid is what pays for care for people who don't have any money, okay? So if you're in a nursing home and, for example, you go through all your funds and you don't have any more funds, then Medicaid would take over and pay for your nursing home care. Now, because the state takes over and pays for that, there are penalties if you try to give all your money away at the last minute. There's a 5-year look back period, and any transfers that you make during that 5-year look back period would create a penalty, and the state would not pay for your care for an amount of time equivalent to the money that you gave away. Well, prepaying for a funeral is one of the few things that you can do that is exempt from those transfer and look back penalties, okay? So it's one of the things that we do kind of at the last minute when we're running out of funds. It also reduces the cost to heirs. So if you run out of money and then you die, then your heirs will have to pay for your funeral. And they may or may not be in a position to do so, or to do so in the way you would have liked. So prepaying it makes sure that the money is there to pay for the funeral, okay? And lastly, it can actually reduce family conflict, because the heirs might disagree about things like what type of service or which funeral home to use. Also, heirs might have unequal resources to spend, so they might disagree about what's an appropriate amount to spend on a funeral. By making sure that's paid for ahead of time, you avoid some of those conflicts. Now, there are some cons to prepaying for a funeral as well, okay? And one is that it may not meet the costs in the future. If it's not a guaranteed contract, then the costs may go up. Also, the funeral home generally will not guarantee the costs that they don't have control over. So that would be the cost of the cemetery, the crematory, the clergy. So generally those portions of it would not be guaranteed. Also, the costs may vary at another funeral home. So if you make an arrangement with one funeral home and then you decide to use another funeral home, then the costs may be different. And the other thing is options may change. So you may have picked out the perfect casket for you, and then when you pass away, that casket is no longer available. So then your family would have to work with the funeral home to say, okay, what would be an equivalent or so forth, and that might lead to additional costs if they make different choices, okay? Another con is the fact that there are steps then to go through if you want to switch funeral homes, is you would have to take those steps to inform the funeral home to switch the trust over to the other funeral home. And so you'd have to go through those steps. And there have been cases where if there isn't good communication between the person who has prepaid for the funeral and the heirs, they don't even know that the funeral has already been paid for, and they may use a different funeral home and end up paying again for services you've already paid for. So if you choose to do this, be sure to communicate about it. The other thing is, of course, the funds may be irrevocable. If you want to qualify for the Medicaid exemption, then it must be irrevocable. You must have given it away permanently, okay? Which means you can't get the money back, and it ties up your funds. So you may decide that you have another thing that you would rather use that money for, and the money is now tied up. There are some other options aside from prepaying a funeral with a funeral home to pay for these costs. So one is an irrevocable trust. So if you already have an irrevocable trust, because perhaps you've done some Medicaid planning or some estate tax planning, then setting aside some of the money in that trust to pay for your funeral would take care of that. That has a better chance of keeping up with the costs, because these trusts that have to be in an interest-bearing account, well, as we all know, banks and so forth are not paying a lot of interest right now, whereas your irrevocable trust could be invested in such a way that it's more likely to keep up with the costs, especially over a long period of time. However, there are costs to create a trust. You have to pay a lawyer to create the documents. You may need a financial advisor to invest the money for you and so on. So if you already have an irrevocable trust, then it makes sense to earmark some of those funds to pay for your funeral. If you don't already have an irrevocable trust, creating one just for those funeral costs may not be a cost-effective choice. Okay. Another option is to simply give the amount to your heirs for that purpose. So if your children are responsible and they all get along, you can either give them each some of the money, or you can give it to one person and say, you're in charge of the funeral and please take care of this money. And this is a good choice if you have the assets to cover 5 years of care. So you know that that look back period won't be a problem for Medicaid, because giving money away to your children does not qualify for any kind of exemption. Another option is to purchase an insurance policy. However, only $1,500 of the cash value is exempt from Medicaid in the state of New York. So that's not very much. The cost of a funeral is more like $10,000 and up. Like everything else in life, the sky's the limit in terms of the luxuries you can choose to purchase. So that $1,500 doesn't help all that much. But what if you already have a whole life insurance policy? Well, you can transfer that asset to your heirs and then it won't be countable against you. But once again, that's a transfer to your heirs. So you have to worry about that 5-year look back period. Another option, if your concern is less about the financial impact, but more about making sure that your choices are reflected in your service, is you can meet with a funeral home, choose the funeral home that you want, make all the choices, just like you can do with Reverend Sherry for your funeral service. You can do it with the funeral home as well. And they will create a file for you and keep it there at the funeral home. And then you just need to be sure to tell your heirs and your executors that this has been done and this is the funeral home they should go to. And then there's no financial impact to doing so, but your choices will be reflected there. After the funeral. So if you're the one who's passed, then this won't impact you very much. However, if you're the survivor and a loved one has passed, there are many things that need to be taken care of afterwards. And some of the things you can do beforehand can make that easier for your heirs. Because the first step they'll have to do is to collect important papers. And there's a checklist that we'll send you along with our other materials. And let's see if I can switch the focus of the sharing here. Give me just a second. Yeah, I think you can see it. So this is a checklist for when a loved one dies. And it goes through, as you can see, collecting important papers. So if these papers are organized in such a way that it's easy for your heirs to find, then that can really be make their lives easier afterwards. And then the checklist also includes things that the survivor needs to do within the first month, within the first 3 months, and then within the first 9 months after the death of a loved one. So we'll be sending that to you. The other thing we'll send you is called the Essential Family Preparedness Workbook. So this is rather a long document, and you can use it as much or as little as it's helpful to you, but it's a place to pull all this information together. It has several sections, such as key information about you and your family, the location of essential documents. So for example, if you have a safe deposit box, you can put information there about where that can be found, or if you've left documents with a financial advisor or a lawyer or something like that. Some medical information that might be helpful for your family to have, your financial information in terms of where your accounts are. Now that everything is digital, it used to be when someone passed away, we would simply say, well, wait 30 days, check the mail, and you'll get statements from all the accounts, and then you'll know where all the accounts are. Well, nowadays, where so much is done digitally, it can be hard to know where all the accounts are and getting access to them. Okay, so then the last section is that digital and professional information. So the professionals would be the information about who's your lawyer, who's your advisor, who's your tax planner, and so on. And then the digital information, where is all this information located? And I'll just show you what this looks like as well. Okay, so it is 50 pages long. So not everyone, as I said, is going to need all sections or want to use all sections. But as you can see, this workbook essentially has places for you to keep all of this information. I'm not going to go through all the pages, but gathering all this information ahead of time will really make things easier for your heirs. Okay. Our next section is a question and answer session, and Bruce is going to moderate that for us. So I hope if you have any questions, you will feel free to raise your hand or put a message in the chat or in some other way, let us know, and we would love to hear what you have to think.
Okay, thank you, Annie. I'm not sure how we're going to go about this, but I suspect we just, if you have a question, then you simply unmute yourself and ask the question. So we're ready and able, maybe, to answer any question you have. We'll at least try. Okay. Yes.
Hi, this is Vicki Robertson. My question is, how,
I like this picture.
oops, how do you choose a funeral home? What are the important things to pay attention to if you're trying to choose a funeral home?
I'll take a stab at that. I would just suggest that you pick 3 and give them a call, talk to them. Things to, I think one of the things I would look for is, have they been, just for longevity, have they been involved in a merger? I mean, some of the smaller funeral homes over the last 10 years or so have merged together with others. So you might want to take a look at their longevity, ask a question about where they see, that you could interview them. Where do you see yourselves in 20 years? And ask about the services that they provide, and get idea about costs. And then how familiar, how comfortable are you with the personnel? And is there, there doesn't have to be great chemistry. It's not a long-term relationship, but how do you feel when you've walked out? How are you feeling?
So Bruce, if
Yes.
you're on gallery view and people use the reaction, raise your hand, the person's square or rectangle moves to the top. So I raise my hand and you should see me at the top.
I do. I just saw that, Annie. That's great. Thank you for the lesson. This is one of the benefits.
If I could just add
So
to, before we get
one
to
of the things I would,
Okay. Don, you're there. Don Wilder has a question.
there are lots of questions. Look.
You need to unmute it.
So I had a question
Oh,
or a
okay.
comment too.
Okay, Annie. Go ahead.
I wasn't just going to. When my sister died, she had a bank account. She died on Saturday. By Monday morning, a hell of a lot in that bank account. But it meant that I had to pay the funeral home and wait through a whole series of crap to get reimbursed from the bank, get the money from the bank. So unless you have a joint account, that can be a significant problem for people.
before we go on to the next question, I just want to add on to Vicki's question. And I'll also just say, Bruce, sorry to get a little bossy here, but so folks can rest their hands. I see, right, Dawn's got a question, Emily's got a question, Joe Cohn has her hand up, Jack has his hand up. So we see all of you. We'll get to you, Howie, Anita, we'll get to you. So you all can rest your hands. We see you, you're in the queue. But Vicky,
Sherry, Sherry, you are you are now appointed as my assistant. You're doing much better.
Okay, I'll be your assistant. I'll tell you the queue, but I'll just follow up on Vicky's. I think Jan had some really great guidance there. I also, the way you choose to do business with any business or contractor, I think also applies here, right? So if it is important to you that you work with a place that has like a real community mindset, and you want to make sure that you're working with a place that is willing to take on occasion has a relationship with, for example, a shelter and buries people. I know a lot of you use, we are just suckers. And that is how people will pick their funeral home. I say this in the most loving way, right? I deeply, deeply love this. But so all of those are ways that other people will select a home as well.
Okay, Joe, you had a question.
Yes, I just wanted to comment. The funeral consumers group was started at First Unitarian Church, I believe in the 60s. Excuse me, that's the current name. The mailing address is 220 Winton Road. So it's out of the church. Excuse me, each year they publish a list of all the funeral homes in Monroe County and nearby areas, and they have the prices for basic services. It's very efficient, and you can, if you wish to shop by price, you can contact whichever one it is. And that's how I was able to shop, so to speak, when I was looking for someone for my parents. It's, I think, a free thing nowadays, although they hope for donations. Highly recommend it. And you can leave a note in their mailbox at the church.
Himself, he was, but Linda is not there.
Jack, I think you had a question.
Yes.
You're muted.
Whoops. No, I'm not. Am I muted, Bruce?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, it's for Reverend Sherry. But first, a comment to Ann on Ann's comment. Some years ago, when our daughter was in town, we took her to the bank with us and had her name added to every one of our accounts. So she has access to that. Reverend Sherry, some years ago, we were told that the church office had a form you could fill out with end of life / funeral arrangements.
Actually, I'm sure not.
Is that still true? And how do we get this form if it exists?
So I can't speak to what happened before. I have also heard that. And if any of you have completed this form and have a copy of it, I would love to see it, because I will say this feels like a mythical holy grail type of thing. I don't have those forms. And so does Sue have them? Is that, you have all the forms, Sue? You have everybody's end of life plan? You got to watch what you say in a group. All right, I'm going to follow up with you, Sue. That's great. My guess would be that some of those deserve some updating also. Some of those hymns are timeless, but tastes change. So
it's vital information. So it's not just funeral. In fact, Bob and I are updating ours, and we've been told they're kept in Reverend Margulies' office in a file there.
I have not seen them. It could be because they're in Reverend Margulies' office, but that's good to know. I mean, and my guess is interesting. I will look into that and I will find out. But I'll say I have a form that I've created as of this morning, right, for moving forward. So,
okay. Yeah. I would also just add, I put it in the chat. Bob and I, both our mothers went through U of R gift donation, and Bob and I are slotted to do likewise. And it's a wonderful service, and there is no cost aside from, as was mentioned, the transportation if you die outside of a medical facility. So, and they cremate the body and there's no cost there. And then you
Yeah.
go in and pick up the cremains when they're available. And the people are very thoughtful. It's very
Yeah.
nice service.
They'll get to us.
Okay. Go ahead.
If we might jump in on that, when my father died, we had some issues with that body donation at U of R, and Mother wants to speak to that and kind of update you on some of the specifics, that it's not always that easy.
Can I,
Yes, speak.
can I speak to that?
Yes, speak to it, Mother.
Okay. My husband, Robert Hurst, had arranged far ahead, always reassured me that he'd made arrangements for his body to be taken by the U of R medical, where it goes when he died, and for me not to worry about it. And so the time came, and I was to sign a paper or something a number of hours after his death. And I was in the office there in the hospital. And these arrangements had been made years ahead. And what happened was they said, when I was to sign the paper, sorry, we can't take him.
They couldn't take his body. They wouldn't take his body.
And so they had never cautioned that you should have backup arrangements in case they refused the body at the time of death. And so we were midnight after that day that he had died. What on earth do we do now? We were supposed to take the body and make all arrangements. And so, as it turned out, we had wonderful help, just coming out of the blue of somebody that happened to be coming in from somewhere else. It was awful, and there was no reason for it why they couldn't have said you must have backup arrangements in case the body should be refused.
Okay, to kind of expand on that, since I was there at the same time, this is my father we're talking about. It seems that as he had gotten older and sicker and had several issues, that his body was not appropriate to be used as a cadaver. Luckily, someone came in who knew of a program down in, I think it was Virginia, in Pennsylvania, where his body could still be used for some sort of research. But if that person had not come up, we were literally 3 or 4 hours after he died, when he was very sick, but it was kind of unexpected too, that he went so quickly, that he had these arrangements. No one had told him that there were physical limitations to these arrangements, and that it's important to know what the requirements, needs, and specifics are when you donate to anywhere, because obviously they have them, they just don't tell you about it when you sign up and you're relatively healthy or okay. You should always have a backup plan. We didn't know of, we didn't even know what the funeral homes were that we could call and have them taken out, but they were telling us, get the body out of here, he's died, get the body out of here, we don't have any place for it, take it away. That they weren't quite that crude, but that's what they were saying was get it, it's not ours, get rid of it, take it away, make arrangements, we can't take it, goodbye.
Colleen and Emily, I'm so sorry that happened to you. What this was such a sad and frustrating experience. I am so sorry that happened to you. Maybe because of the experience that you had, in the fine print on the forms that they now have, they do say, in the unlikely event that they're unable to accept your body, be sure you do have backup. And I'm sure that I just printed those forms out a day or so ago. And I think it was probably because of your experience that they've added that language. So that you've made a great point for all of us, and thank you for sharing that.
That may be, but also it's important that it is pointed out to people that they need to, one, keep up with what the requirements are periodically as part of their planning process. And also two, make sure that it's pointed out in general before the last moment, so they do make these, because if it's in fine print, not everybody reads through every fine print or remembers the specifics 10 years down the line. So we need to make sure that people are, and it's probably not just the U of R, probably it's with anywhere that you donate, that they won't, just because you donated doesn't mean they'll take it.
Emily, thank you. And truly, I mean, that does sound like.
And I'll be quiet, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I'm grateful to you for sharing that so that folks know, and we know that it's good to continue to update your plans and have a backup. And truly, we are sorry that you had to live through that experience for us to learn from your lesson, but we will learn from it.
Yes.
So I think we've got Don Wilder with the next question. Oh no, okay, well, great. How about you, Howie?
Howie's gone from it as well.
No, he's here. He's here.
I'm just unmuting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Left to my own devices, I would probably go like Prince Philip and plan every last detail. Another part of me says that my family might like to do it things their own way, things they want to say or do, or music they want to play that would be appropriate. So I've, in the occasional times when I've thought about this topic, I've gotten hung up on, well, how much should I give in to my own tendency to plan everything versus let it happen, trusting my family, who are also great workshop and event planners. So I wonder if you have any advice of, I suppose I could just say, here's what some of my ideas, now do what you would like. Whether you have any advice for dealing with that conundrum.
Yeah, so I'll say that the biggest place of stress that I see for families, and I'll say I am perhaps a little bit unorthodox in this, in that I do think when you've planned as much as possible in advance, then it does relieve some stress. And in some ways, those decisions, this hymn versus that hymn, is part of the process of grieving. It's part of the remembering process. And if you've got folks who are great event planners and that's going to be a fruitful conversation, then I wouldn't feel like you need to plan your way out of that experience for them. The biggest thing is that people get caught up on, am I doing the right thing? The people who are left behind, they want to know that it would have been to your preferences. And so I'll say in my memorial plan, which is incredibly detailed, all of those parameters are, I would like this person to select the music because I trust whatever they do. And I would like this person to speak, or this person if that first person is unavailable. And it doesn't actually give any of the specifics around the liturgy, but it names people and it gives them the gift of my trust in them. Whatever they do, that's what I want. So I think exactly what you said of like, here's my ideas and do what you will is a type of plan, but you just have to communicate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Jack, did you have something? Again, your face showed up. Okay. Don Wilder was on our list. He had a question. I don't know where Don is here.
So I think we've got Mike McNulty and Anita Rosenfeld, and then Annie's there. And then I think Colleen or Emily was trying to get back in the queue. So they're the next one.
Take over, Sherry.
Wilder and I did not have a question, so I'm not sure how I got on the list.
We just wanted to hear the dulcet tones of your voice, I guess. So we'll go down to Mike. Mike, you had a question in the chat. If you want me to just read it, you would like to have the church do your memorial service. We would be honored. I think this is one of the reasons churches exist. So the costs associated with that, there is no cost if you are a member to have a memorial service and for the building or the clergy. Oh, thank you for whomever muted me. So again, if you're a member, you've been a part of the life of this church, part of our congregation, it is an honor for us to be able to offer a memorial service for the people who loved you. And it is one of the named benefits of being a member. You just can't cash in on it until you're dead. So where there may be additional costs are if there are music choices that require us to bring in outside musicians or AV techs, or if a reception requires a sexton to clean up, to set up, there may be additional costs there, which can be prepaid and held at the church. But the clergy and the building, which are sort of the main costs of the service itself, that's a covered benefit of membership. Folks are invited if they would like. Sometimes family members would like to give a donation to the church. We always welcome that, but it's not required by members at all.
I'd like to one more thing associated
Sure.
with it. I was thinking of doing having a catered meal or something. After probably an hour or whatever, 10 minutes or whatever it would be for the serve. So, and I probably would take advantage of the Memorial Garden too. That's something. I was going to, another question, kind of the point is, I'd probably like to have a tree planted on the grounds. Is that's a possibility?
It is a likely possibility. It's not a guarantee, as some of that depends on the landscaping needs. It's certainly our hope to be able to offer that, but we do, as it turns out, we have beautiful gardens, and a lot of that depends on timing, right? My guess is there will still be trees planted, but there is a finite amount of space. So I just want to make sure that I'm not naming something as a guarantee that we can't guarantee to everyone. I have been told multiple times that by the time I die, there will be no more space for new trees, which I guess is sort of a lovely thing, but disappointing, I will say, for me. Good to know. But so I'll just, a couple of things about that. So our church, we do a punch and cookies reception. In my mind, it's the punch that Susan B. Anthony drank. I don't think anyone ever said that to me. I just made it up, but I love our memorial service punch. Someone will have to fill me in on the story another time. We do a punch and cookies reception. If families would like to do a meal, that's something you'd want to talk about with your family in terms of cost and planning, but totally a possibility at the church, right? Provided it's not COVID times. And with the Memorial Garden, in order for there to be upkeep and, oh yeah, Annie, that's a great idea in terms of there may be other places where we need trees if we ever get to that point where we run out of space for trees. It's true. With regards to the Memorial Garden, there's a suggested donation for the upkeep of the Memorial Garden and the plaque and the book of $500, but no member is turned away for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Great answer.
I think we have Anita left.
Great.
The question.
Oh, Anita, a button's gonna come up on your screen asking you to unmute.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I have two questions, both of which, given this program, sound very naive. Just a minute. I would like to know what the difference is between a funeral and a memorial service.
I think it's a great question because a lot of us pretend like we know the answer to that question and we use them interchangeably. The difference is the presence of a body. So if we often, I think in common conversation, will use them interchangeably, but that is the technical difference. Both are options. In Unitarian Universalism, a memorial service is more common.
Is the minister there at the funeral?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm next on the list.
I have two questions.
Oh, sorry, Anita.
It's okay. My second question is also very naive. Are most of these arrangements that you're talking about, are they best done with an attorney or with the church?
Great question. It depends on the arrangement. So when it comes to what would you like done at the funeral or memorial service, those are all good questions for the church, but the vast majority of them are things that you would do with an attorney or your loved ones or a funeral home or a financial planner. So I think Annie and Jan, I'm kicking it to you, though Elise, I know you have a lot of experience also in terms of where's the best place. Like if folks got off this call and wanted to make a phone call to someone else to start making some plans, who would be the next person to call?
Well, I would point out that I'm going to talk about our future sessions, but our
Okay.
next session, we're going to talk about a lot of that. So that might be part of it. I think the focus today is more about the planning of the funeral itself, which would be more with the church. Okay, shall we move on to the last question? So in the chat, some people had asked about, the accessibility of funds, as Anne brought up, in a bank account or through an insurance policy or things like that. And that can really be a challenge. So what I would say about that is if you have a joint bank account, keep in mind that the bank won't do anything until it knows the person has died. So if funds are an issue, you might consider taking the funds from that account before informing the bank that the person has died. Now, since it's a joint account, it should simply, the funds should go to the other person whose name is on the account. So I'm a little surprised to hear that that's been a problem, but I can see some banks saying, well, we can't do that transfer. And so now it's no longer a joint account, it's an individual account. We need a death certificate and so forth. So just be aware of that. Another type of bank account that you can set up or brokerage account is something called a transfer on death account, where it's not joint funds, but when you pass away, it goes to whatever beneficiary you've named. But that has the same issue, which is the bank is going to say, we need to see a death certificate. And it can take several days to get a death certificate. So that's great for all those other things that you need to do down the road. But in terms of freeing up funds for the funeral itself, it's going to take a little while. Another thing to keep in mind is that a power of attorney will not be honored after someone's death. The idea is, even if they gave you a power of attorney before death, they're not around to revoke it. So we can't know that they would still want that to be in place. So it immediately becomes invalid. After you die, the person who makes those decisions and has power over your assets is your executor of your estate, or representative, as it's now called. But again, it can take a little while for that person to get appointed. So Dave brought up the question of an insurance policy. Once again, you will need a death certificate for the insurance proceeds to be released. However, that is sometimes one of the fastest ways. It's certainly faster than transferring accounts through the estate. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Well, it's almost 11:15 now, so I think it's time to wrap up. So I really want to thank Elise and Kristen from the pastoral care team for joining us today. I want to thank Reverend Sherry for sharing her expertise with us today. And I'm just going to share my screen again. So your Legacy Society Committee, which consists of myself and Jan and Bruce, has planned this whole series of events really to talk about your legacy, which often the Legacy Society is seen as just being a means to get people to include the church in their will and so forth. And that is, of course, important to us. But we are expanding the focus a little bit to say, we care about your legacy in all kinds of ways, and we want to be there with you to help you think about and do this planning. So today was about planning your funeral. The next one on May 22nd will be about planning your financial legacy. And that's where we will talk about things like wills, power of attorney, trusts, charitable bequests, taxes, and things like that. And then our next session after that on June 12th will be a workshop on planning your personal legacy, which is sometimes called creating an ethical will, where we will talk about some of the values and beliefs and things that we want to leave behind that don't have to do with our assets or finances and that sort of thing. And then we hope to wrap all this up with a Legacy Society luncheon in September. We hope that you will all want to join us at that. And hopefully it'll be in person, which is why we're putting that off until September. If you have any questions about what we went over today, we have an email address, legacy@rochesterunitarian.org. That email address will reach all three of us, Jan and Bruce and myself, so feel free to reach out there. We'd also appreciate it if any of you have included the church in your final plans, then we'd appreciate you letting us know. We have some old records, so some of you may have already let the committee know, but please let us know again, even if you think you've already informed the committee, because we've had some turnover of people and so forth. We will be sending out the information that we went over today, the PowerPoint slides, some of those documents that we referred to. We will send them via email. We have all of your names who attended today, and we will get your email addresses from Simple Church. So please make sure your email address is up to date in Simple Church. If any of you would like a packet mailed to you instead, then feel free to email legacy@rochesterunitarian.org and let us know that, and we will pop one in the mail to you. And now I'd like to turn things back over to Elise for our closing words.
Extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you, everyone.
Legacy team, as folks are trickling out to the Steinman's question, are we planning to make this recording available on YouTube? Are you all comfortable with that?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, we had said all of our sessions except for the Plan Your Personal Legacy, because that might involve some, really personal feelings and stories. So we were not going to make that one available.
Okay.
I don't know whether our recording got started. I'm going to actually stop the recording now.
Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good.